The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle's courtyard as 8-year-old Princess Charlotte pressed her face against the tall windows of the state apartments. Her breath fogged the glass as she watched the changing of the guard ceremony below, something that had fascinated her since she could barely walk. Today felt different, though, charged with an energy she couldn't quite understand. Charlotte had always been drawn to the pomp and ceremony of royal life, but more than that, she was captivated by the people who made it all possible. The guards in their iconic red tunics and towering bearskin hats weren't just decorations to her. They were real people with real stories, something her parents, Prince William and Catherine, had always emphasized. Each person you meet has a story worth hearing, her mother had told her just the week before, during one of their walks through Kensington Gardens. Never forget that behind every uniform, every title, every role, there's a human being deserving of respect and kindness. These words echoed in Charlotte's mind as she watched the ceremony unfold. The precision of the guards' movements, the way they held themselves with such dignity and pride, filled her with a sense of awe that never seemed to diminish. She knew from her parents that many of these men and women had served their country in far more dangerous places than the relative safety of the royal residences. As the formal ceremony concluded and the tourists began to disperse, Charlotte noticed something that made her stomach twist with unease. A small group of teenagers, probably around 16 or 17 years old, had lingered near the gates. They weren't there for the usual photos or souvenirs that most visitors sought. Instead, they seemed to be focused on one particular guard who had taken his position at the main entrance. The guard was young, probably in his early 20s, with the kind of earnest face that suggested he took his duties seriously. He stood perfectly still, eyes fixed ahead, embodying the disciplined professionalism that the Queen's Guard was famous for worldwide. Charlotte had learned from her father that this stillness wasn't just for show. It was a mark of respect for the institution they served and the people they protected. What happened next made Charlotte's hands clench into small fists against the window. The group of teenagers approached the guard, and at first it seemed like they might be curious tourists, but their body language was all wrong. They moved with the swagger of people looking for trouble, their voices carrying an edge that even from her distance Charlotte could detect. She couldn't hear their exact words, but she could see their gestures becoming more animated, more aggressive. One of them, a tall boy with bleached hair, was pointing directly at the guard's face, saying something that made his companions laugh in a way that didn't sound friendly at all. Another was making exaggerated marching movements, mocking the very precision and dignity that Charlotte so admired. The guard, bound by protocol and duty, remained motionless. His training demanded that he ignore such provocations, that he stand as an immovable symbol of British tradition regardless of what was said or done to him. But Charlotte could see something in his posture, a slight tension around his shoulders, that suggested this wasn't easy for him. Her young heart began to race as the situation escalated. The teenagers were getting bolder, emboldened by the guard's inability to respond. One of them actually reached out and flicked the guard's ceremonial bayonet, while another made crude gestures that would have been inappropriate anywhere, but felt especially vile in this setting. Charlotte had grown up understanding the weight of tradition and duty. She knew that the guard couldn't simply walk away or tell these people to stop. He was trapped by his own honor and the centuries of protocol that governed his role. This realization made her feel a burning sense of injustice that seemed far too sophisticated for her. The worst part was that adults were walking by, pretending not to see what was happening. Some tourists even seemed amused, as if the harassment was part of the entertainment. This indifference from grown-ups who should have known better made Charlotte feel angry in a way she had rarely experienced. She thought about her great-grandmother, the late Queen Elizabeth, who had always spoken about duty and service with such reverence. The Queen had taught her that with privilege came responsibility, and that those who served the crown deserved nothing but respect and gratitude. Seeing this young man being humiliated while trying to honor that service felt like a betrayal of everything her family stood for. Charlotte's mind raced through her options. She could call for her protection officer, but that would likely create a scene that might embarrass the guard further. She could tell her parents, but they were in meetings, and by the time she reached them, who knew how much worse things might get? The palace staff were busy with their duties, and she wasn't even supposed to be watching from this window unsupervised. But as she watched the harassment continue, something crystallized in her young mind. This wasn't just about protocol or proper channels. This was about basic human decency. And sometimes that required action especially when, it wasn't convenient or proper. The decision formed in her heart before her mind had fully processed it. Charlotte turned from the window and walked purposefully toward her bedroom door. She paused only to grab her favorite cardigan, the blue one, with the small crown embroidered on the pocket that her grandmother had given her for her birthday. As she made her way through the familiar corridors of Windsor Castle, Charlotte thought about all the lessons her parents had taught her about leadership. They had always emphasized that being royal wasn't about being served, but about serving others. They had shown her through their own actions that true nobility came from standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. The security staff nodded respectfully as she passed, used to seeing the young princess moving about the castle with the confident independence that had marked her personality from an early age. None of them questioned where she was going. After all, she was known to be a curious child who liked to explore and learn about the workings of her family's various residences. Charlotte's heart pounded as she approached the main entrance, but her steps never faltered. She had no detailed plan, only a clear sense of what was right and what was wrong. The image of that young guard standing there, absorbing insults and mockery while maintaining his dignity, had burned itself into her consciousness. As she reached the heavy doors that led to the courtyard, Charlotte paused for just a moment. She was about to step outside the protective bubble of the castle into a situation that could unfold in any number of ways. But the memory of her great-grandmother's words about duty gave her strength. Sometimes duty meant following rules, but sometimes it meant breaking them for a higher purpose. Taking a deep breath, Princess Charlotte pushed open the doors and stepped into the morning sunlight, ready to face whatever consequences her next actions might bring. The young guard and his tormentors were just a few yards away, and she could now hear clearly the cruel words being directed at someone whose only crime was serving her family and country with honor. What happened next would not only shock the teenagers who thought they could humiliate a member of the Queen's Guard with impunity, but would also reveal the kind of person Princess Charlotte was growing up to be and the kind of future monarch she might one day become. The moment Princess Charlotte stepped into the courtyard, the dynamics of the entire situation shifted, though the teenagers harassing the guard didn't immediately notice her presence. She was, after all, just a small girl in a blue cardigan, and their attention was focused entirely on their cruel entertainment. Charlotte moved closer, her soft shoes making barely any sound on the ancient stones. Now she could hear every word of their taunts, and each one made her more determined to act. The ringleader, the tall boy with bleached hair, was making jokes about the guard's inability to move or speak, calling him names that would have made Charlotte's parents wash her mouth out with soap if she had ever repeated them. "Look at this robot," the boy sneered, waving his hand inches from the guard's face. "I bet he doesn't even blink. What kind of person just stands there like a statue? Must not have much going on upstairs." His friends laughed, encouraged by what they saw as clever wit. One of them, a girl with bright pink hair, began taking selfies while making rude gestures next to the stoic guard. "This is going straight to social media," she announced. "Wait till everyone sees this." The guard's name tag read Thompson, and Charlotte could see a slight muscle twitch in his jaw that suggested he was fighting every instinct to respond to their provocations. His eyes remained fixed straight ahead, but there was something in their depths, hurt, frustration, maybe even embarrassment, that made Charlotte's chest tight with sympathy. She had learned from her parents about the men and women who served in the Queen's Guard. Many were veterans who had served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other dangerous places around the world. They had chosen to continue their service to the crown in this ceremonial role, and they deserved respect, not ridicule. The thought that this young man might have risked his life for his country, only to be mocked by these teenagers, made Charlotte's resolve even stronger. Taking a deep breath, Charlotte stepped forward into the circle of tormentors. Her voice, clear and carrying the unmistakable accent of her upbringing, cut through their laughter like a knife. "Excuse me," she said politely but firmly. "I think you should stop bothering this gentleman." The teenagers turned to look at her, and Charlotte saw the exact moment when recognition dawned on their faces. The girl with pink hair actually dropped her phone, the plastic case clattering against the cobblestones with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. "Oh my God," whispered one of them. That's Princess Charlotte." The ringleader's face went through a rapid series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and then a kind of panic that suggested he was quickly calculating just how much trouble he might be in. But Charlotte didn't give him time to recover his composure. "This man is doing his job," she continued, her young voice carrying an authority that seemed to come from somewhere deep within her royal heritage. "He's protecting my family and serving our country. He can't respond to you because he's a professional, but that doesn't give you the right to be mean to him." The word mean might have sounded childish coming from anyone else, but from Princess Charlotte, it carried the weight of a moral judgment that made the teenagers shuffle uncomfortably. She stepped closer to Guard Thompson, positioning herself slightly in front of him in what could only be described as a protective stance. "I've been watching from the window," Charlotte said, her eyes moving from one teenager to another with the kind of steady gaze she had inherited from generations of royals who had faced down much more intimidating opponents than a group of embarrassed bullies. "And what I saw was a group of people being unkind to someone who couldn't defend himself. That's not brave. That's the opposite of brave." The girl with pink hair bent down to retrieve her phone, her face red with embarrassment. We were just having a bit of fun," she stammered. "We didn't mean anything by it." Charlotte's expression didn't soften. "How would you feel if someone came to your work and made fun of you while you were trying to do your job? If they called you names and took pictures to laugh about later?" The question hung in the air, and Charlotte could see that at least some of the teenagers were genuinely considering it. The ringleader, however, seemed to be struggling between embarrassment and a desire to maintain his authority within the group. "It's not the same thing," he said, though with much less confidence than he had shown before. He chose to stand there like that. "He knew people would look at him." Charlotte nodded thoughtfully, as if considering his point seriously. Then she spoke with a wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. "You're right that he chose this job. He chose to serve our country and protect people like you and me. He chose to stand here with dignity even when people try to make him feel small. That makes him brave, not foolish." She turned slightly toward Guard Thompson, and though he couldn't break his stance to acknowledge her, Charlotte thought she saw something shift in his posture, a subtle straightening that suggested her words had reached him. "My great-grandmother, the Queen, always taught us that everyone deserves to be treated with respect, especially people who serve others," Charlotte continued, turning back to face the teenagers. "She said that how we treat people who can't fight back shows who we really are." The reference to the late Queen Elizabeth seemed to have a profound effect on the group. Even these rebellious teenagers had grown up with respect for the monarch who had served Britain for 70 years, and the idea that they were disappointing her memory was clearly weighing on them. One of the boys, who had been quieter than the others, stepped forward. "We're sorry, Princess Charlotte," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't think about it like that." Charlotte nodded approvingly at him, then looked at the others expectantly. Slowly, one by one, they mumbled apologies, not just to her, but to Guard Thompson as well. Even though he couldn't respond, Charlotte could see that their words were registering with him. But Charlotte wasn't finished. With the kind of social intelligence that royal children develop early out of necessity, she realized that simply stopping the harassment wasn't enough. These teenagers needed to understand not just what they had done wrong, but why it mattered. "Would you like to know something about the Queen's Guard?" she asked, her tone becoming more conversational and less confrontational. The teenagers nodded, seeming genuinely curious now that their defensive walls were down. Charlotte began to share some of the stories her parents and grandparents had told her about the men and women who served in this role. She spoke about their rigorous training, their service records, their dedication to protecting the royal family, even when it meant standing motionless for hours in all kinds of weather. "They can't move or speak while they're on duty," she explained, "but that doesn't mean they're not real people with feelings. They have families who are proud of them, friends who miss them when they're deployed, and dreams for their futures just like everyone else." As Charlotte spoke, a small crowd began to gather. Other tourists, drawn by the unusual sight of a young princess speaking earnestly to a group of teenagers, stopped to listen. Some began recording with their phones, though their expressions suggested they were capturing something remarkable rather than scandalous. The teenagers found themselves in an increasingly uncomfortable position as more people took notice of the situation. What had started as anonymous bullying was now very public, and they were clearly beginning to understand the gravity of their earlier behavior. Charlotte sensed their discomfort, but didn't want to humiliate them further. Instead, she made a decision that would later be described by royal watchers as showing remarkable emotional intelligence for someone so young. "I know you're good people who just made a mistake," she said, addressing the group directly. "Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what we do next." She paused, looking thoughtful for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "Would you like to do something to show that you understand why this was wrong? Something positive?" The teenagers exchanged glances, clearly uncertain, but also intrigued by the possibility of redemption that the young princess was offering them. The ringleader, who had been silent for several minutes, finally found his voice. "What did you have in mind, Your Highness?" he asked. And Charlotte noticed that his tone had completely changed from the sneering confidence he had displayed earlier. Charlotte smiled for the first time since she had stepped outside, and the warmth of that smile seemed to transform the entire atmosphere of the courtyard. What she proposed next would not only surprise everyone present, but would also create a moment that would be remembered and talked about for years to come. Princess Charlotte's smile seemed to light up the entire courtyard as she looked at the group of teenagers who had, just moments before, been tormenting Guard Thompson. Her next words would not only surprise everyone present, but would also demonstrate a level of compassion and wisdom that would later be analyzed by royal experts and child psychologists alike. "I think," Charlotte said thoughtfully, "that you should learn about what it really means to serve. Not as punishment, but so you can understand why what you were doing was hurtful." The teenagers looked puzzled, but also intrigued. The ringleader shifted uncomfortably, clearly still processing the surreal nature of being lectured on ethics by an 8-year-old princess. Charlotte turned to one of the palace staff members who had appeared at the edge of the growing crowd, drawn by the unusual gathering. With the confidence that came from a lifetime of knowing that her requests would be taken seriously, she beckoned him over. "Could you please ask Colonel Matthews if he could spare a few minutes to speak with these young people?" she asked politely. "I think they would benefit from hearing about what the Queen's Guard actually does." Colonel Matthews was the officer in charge of the Windsor Castle Guard detail, a decorated veteran with 30 years of military service under his belt. The staff member nodded immediately and hurried away, speaking quietly into his radio. While they waited, Charlotte continued her impromptu education session. She asked the teenagers about themselves, where they were from, what they were studying, what they hoped to do with their lives. Her genuine interest in their answers gradually broke down their remaining defenses, and they found themselves opening up to this remarkable young girl who had every reason to be angry with them, but instead seemed determined to help them understand. "I'm studying history at college," admitted the girl with pink hair, whose name was Emma. "I actually wrote an essay about the royal family last term, but I never really thought about the people who work for them as real individuals." Charlotte nodded encouragingly. "That's exactly what I mean. It's easy to see the ceremony and the tradition without thinking about the human beings who make it all possible. Within minutes, Colonel Matthews appeared, his impressive uniform and bearing commanding immediate respect from the assembled crowd. Charlotte approached him with the kind of easy familiarity that spoke to her comfortable relationship with the palace staff. "Colonel Matthews," she said formally, "these young people were curious about the Queen's Guard. Would you be able to tell them about what guards like Thompson here actually do?" The colonel's experienced eyes quickly assessed the situation. He had served the royal family long enough to recognize when Princess Charlotte was handling a delicate situation with remarkable maturity. Without missing a beat, he played along with her strategy. "I'd be delighted, Your Royal Highness," he said, then turned to address the teenagers directly. "First, let me tell you about Guard Thompson here. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan before joining the Household Division. He's been decorated for bravery under fire, and he volunteers at a veterans' charity in his spare time." The teenagers' expressions shifted dramatically as they began to understand exactly who they had been mocking. The ringleader looked genuinely sick as the full weight of his behavior hit him. Colonel Matthews continued, describing the rigorous training that every member of the Queen's Guard undergoes. Their active military duties alongside their ceremonial roles, and the physical and mental discipline required to perform their duties with such precision and dignity. Standing at attention for hours while maintaining complete composure isn't easy, he explained. Especially when people try to provoke a reaction. It requires tremendous self-control and dedication to duty. Emma raised her hand tentatively, like a student in class. "How do they handle it when people are unkind to them?" The colonel's expression softened slightly. "It's one of the most challenging aspects of the job, to be honest. These men and women are trained soldiers who have often faced life-and-death situations, but they can't respond to mockery or harassment while on duty. They have to trust that the public will treat them with the respect they've earned." The silence that followed this statement was profound. Even the tourists who had gathered to watch were clearly moved by the colonel's words and the situation they were witnessing. Charlotte stepped forward again, sensing that the moment was right for her final intervention. "I think," she said carefully, "that these young people would like to make up for their earlier behavior. Would it be possible for them to do something helpful? Maybe learn more about the work that our guards do?" What happened next surprised everyone, including Charlotte herself. The ringleader stepped forward, his earlier bravado completely gone. "Your Royal Highness," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "I need to apologize, not just to you, but to Guard Thompson, and to everyone here. What we did was wrong, and there's no excuse for it." He turned to face Guard Thompson directly. "Sir, I'm sorry. I'm truly, deeply sorry. I was ignorant and cruel, and you didn't deserve any of that." His friends quickly followed suit, offering sincere apologies not just to the guard, but to Charlotte and Colonel Matthews as well. The transformation in their demeanor was remarkable, from cocky bullies to genuinely remorseful young people who were beginning to understand the magnitude of their mistake. Charlotte watched this with satisfaction, but she wasn't finished yet. With the kind of strategic thinking that would serve her well in her future royal duties, she recognized an opportunity to turn this negative situation into something genuinely positive. "Colonel Matthews," she said, "do you think there might be a way for these young people to volunteer with the veterans charity that Guard Thompson supports? I think they would like to do something meaningful to show they understand." The colonel smiled, clearly impressed by the young princess's ability to find constructive solutions. "I think that could certainly be arranged, Your Royal Highness. The charity is always looking for young volunteers, and I suspect Guard Thompson would appreciate knowing that something positive came out of today's events." Emma spoke up eagerly. "We would love that, Your Royal Highness. And maybe we could write about our experience? Help other people understand what we learned today?" Charlotte's face lit up with approval. "That's a wonderful idea. Perhaps you could share your story so that other people don't make the same mistakes you did." As the immediate situation began to wind down, something unexpected happened. Other tourists who had witnessed the encounter began approaching Charlotte and the teenagers, many of them expressing their own admiration for how the situation had been handled. An elderly man who identified himself as a veteran stepped forward to shake hands with each of the teenagers. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong and try to make it right," he said. "I respect that." A family from America asked if they could take a photo with Charlotte and the Reformed group, saying they wanted to remember witnessing such a remarkable example of grace and wisdom from someone so young. But perhaps the most touching moment came when Guard Thompson's shift finally ended 20 minutes later. As he was relieved by another guard, he was able to step down from his post for the first time since the incident began. Charlotte was still there, talking with the teenagers about their volunteer plans, when Guard Thompson approached her. He came to attention and saluted formally. But when he spoke, his voice carried genuine emotion. "Your Royal Highness," he said, "thank you, not just for stopping what was happening, but for turning it into something positive. That meant more to me than you can possibly know." Charlotte smiled up at the tall soldier. "Thank you for your service, Guard Thompson. My great-grandmother always said that the people who serve others are the most important people in the kingdom. I'm proud that people like you protect my family." The teenagers watched this exchange with obvious emotion. Several of them had tears in their eyes as they witnessed the genuine mutual respect between the young princess and the soldier. Emma spoke up one final time. "Your Royal Highness, is there anything else we can do? Any other way we can show that we've learned from this?" Charlotte considered this seriously, then smiled with an idea that would later be described by royal watchers as inspired. "Actually," she said, "I think the best thing you can do is remember this feeling, the feeling of knowing you've done something wrong and wanting to make it right. And then, when you see other people being unkind or unfair to someone who can't defend themselves, I hope you'll step in and speak up. Not because you have to, but because it's the right thing to do." As the group finally began to disperse, with the teenagers exchanging contact information so they could follow up on their volunteer commitments, Charlotte received an unexpected visitor. Prince William appeared in the courtyard, having been informed by security about his daughter's impromptu intervention. He approached Charlotte with the kind of measured stride that suggested he wasn't sure whether to be proud or concerned about her independent action. "Charlotte," he said gently, "I heard about what happened here. Are you all right?" Charlotte nodded confidently. "Yes, Papa. I saw those people being mean to Guard Thompson, and I remembered what Mama said about everyone having a story worth hearing. I thought about what great-grandmother would have done." Prince William looked at his daughter for a long moment, then at Guard Thompson, who was standing nearby. The guard stepped forward and provided a brief, professional account of what had transpired, emphasizing Princess Charlotte's remarkable maturity and effectiveness in handling the situation. When Guard Thompson finished his report, Prince William turned back to Charlotte. His expression had shifted from concerned to unmistakable pride. "You did exactly the right thing," he said, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Your great-grandmother would indeed be very proud of you, and so am I." As father and daughter walked back toward the castle together, Charlotte looked back one final time at the courtyard, where so much had changed in such a short time. The new guard was at his post, standing with the same dignity and professionalism as Guard Thompson had shown. The tourists were taking their photos and enjoying their visit to Windsor Castle, as they did every day. But Charlotte knew that for at least 6 young people, this day had been transformative. They had learned something important about respect, service, and the courage it takes to admit when you're wrong and try to make things right. More importantly, Princess Charlotte had learned something about herself. She had discovered that when faced with injustice, she had the courage to act, the wisdom to seek understanding rather than simply punishment, and the compassion to help others become better versions of themselves. These were the qualities that would serve her well in the years to come as she grew into her role as a future leader of the British monarchy. But for now, she was simply a young girl who had stood up for someone who needed defending, and in doing so, had made the world a little bit kinder than it had been that morning. The story of Princess Charlotte and Guard Thompson would be retold many times in the years that followed, becoming a symbol of the kind of leadership that puts human dignity above protocol, compassion above convenience, and moral courage above personal comfort. It was, many would say, exactly the kind of story that the royal family needed the world to hear.